Hello, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live series, Navigating Your Path to Nonprofit and Private Company Boards. My name is Heather Spilsbury, and I'm the CEO of 50/50 Women on Boards, a nonprofit organization committed to advocating and educating for women to join corporate boards. We do this several ways: through research, through our annual strategic networking events held in the US and internationally, and through our programs and events, including our 50 Women to Watch campaign, where we selected 50 women in 2023 who are ready for public company board service, but not yet serving on a public company board. Today, we have an incredible conversation with some of those 50 Women to Watch and Janet Wong, who is on our selection committee for this year's 50/50 Women to Watch for Boards campaign. In addition to that, we also have workshops for everyone so that aspiring board directors can continue on their path to the boardroom. So hopefully this conversation strikes that interest in you and you can learn more about how to join a nonprofit or private company board. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you, Heather. I'm happy to be joining you today. Just a little bit on my background. I am an experienced board director with public, private, and nonprofit board experience. I currently serve on 3 public company boards. But more importantly, because we're talking about nonprofit boards today, I currently serve on 2 nonprofit boards, the Tri-Cities chapter of the National Association of Corporate Directors, as well as the Louisiana Tech University Foundation.
Great. We're so happy to have you. And thank you so much for being on our selection committee. We appreciate what you're doing to support these women in the pipeline. Why don't we bring our 50 Women to Watch speakers to stage? And if you would all do me the favor of quickly introducing yourself to the audience. Joanne, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Heather. My name is Joanne Schroeder, and I am currently serving on 2 boards. One is a private company board, Goodwill of Orange County, which is, I'm sure, a household name to many people, and another private company board, which is Adolphson and Peterson, $1 billion a year construction company.
Wonderful. Nicole?
Hello, everybody. My name is Nicole Reich. I'm based in Mexico City. I have been in financial industry all my life, banks and insurance. I'm a board member today, and I am the president of the board for BNP Paribas Cardif, which is the insurance part of the French bank in Mexico. And I'm also a board member and president of the audit committee of BBB Foods, better known as Tiendas 3B in Mexico. And I also had the audit committee. And I'm also an independent board member for Gentera Compartamos, which is a big financial institution serving the base of the pyramid. On nonprofit boards, I have the honor to serve on Junior Achievement on the Mexico chapter, and I also head the Risk Committee for Junior Achievement, which is a worldwide organization. Actually, we're nominated for the Nobel Prize this year. We hope we win. That helps young people who have financial difficulties to get a better education and hopefully a better life. Thank you. I'm happy to be here with such a group.
Wonderful. Vonda?
Hi, I'm Vonda Huss, and I am the CHRO at Bright House Financial, and I currently serve on 2 nonprofit boards that are near and dear to my heart. I serve as the vice chair of the Novant Health Foundation board and the compensation committee chair of the YMCA of Greater Charlotte.
Wonderful. Patty?
Thank you, Heather, and thank you all for joining today. I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to be here with all of you and learn from each of your experiences. I'm Patty Carrolo. I'm a VP at Google and a former GM at IBM. I've served on 3 nonprofit boards. My first was a YMCA board. I also served on 2 alumni boards for Harvard Business School. And I'm now serving as a board director for a healthcare organization. It's a private organization. And thanks to 50/50 Women on Boards for all the wonderful training that we had the past year.
Great. We're happy to have you. Joy?
I'm Joy Randels. I'm the CEO of Prowess Group, and I am also a venture capitalist. I've served on public, private, and nonprofit boards in the past. I currently serve on 2 blockchain technology companies boards and another that is a cybersecurity guild. and a nonprofit, a global nonprofit, the Little St. Nick Foundation, that assists children in healthcare facilities around the world.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I love this topic because we get this question a lot. So I'm excited to dive in and talk to you all about this. But my first question really is, what are the key differences between serving on nonprofit boards versus private company boards? I know there's a lot of differences, so maybe we can go down a couple things, like down a list.
I think that one of the big differences, so good governance is good governance, regardless of what board that you serve on. But a key difference in the nonprofit world, typically you're asked to do some extra duty at the end of the day, right? Doing things such as helping with fundraising, those type of activities. And it's more participatory than, say, a typical fiduciary board would be. So to me, that's the key difference.
Yeah, and I could add to that because I think you also look at who are your stakeholders, and typically with the nonprofit, you're serving the members of the organization, the cause, and the community perhaps that you're in. For example, somebody gave the example of being on their YMCA board. And then with the private board, typically you're serving the owners.
I can also add to that. I think one of the things of serving on nonprofit boards is normally you have perfect alignment on the vision and the mission, because everybody that is in that board is absolutely committed to the cause. And I think on private boards, that's not always the case. It's a little bit more profit oriented. And sometimes in certain private boards, you can have a lot of family conflicts or owner conflicts that you will not see in a nonprofit board.
Very true. I think that's a good reason to join a nonprofit too, right? Wouldn't you say that not only do you want to find one that has good corporate governance, you do get that board experience, but you really have to be committed to that cause and that mission.
Heather, I couldn't agree with you more. I would say people often ask me, because I have served on a lot of nonprofit boards, and I do a lot of nonprofit activities in the communities that I live in. And so people always ask me about getting on a nonprofit and just either as a volunteer or the board. And I say, please, there's so many nonprofits, make sure that you understand the mission and that's something that you have a passion for, because there are so many nonprofits. And don't just get on a nonprofit because you feel like you want to do board service.
Mm-hmm.
To that point, I think there's one other thing to really consider. So almost all large nonprofits will have D&O insurance. You will find that certain small nonprofits may or may not have that. And it's really good to ask that question, because if you've built up personal wealth or, your earnings, things like that could be in jeopardy. So it's really important to know that there's insurance there to protect you, even in a nonprofit space.
And on a private company board, there's much more due diligence involved. You'll have to see, do you like the CEO? Do you like the other board members? Can you bring value to the organization? And if this is a first for you, is this the right match for you? So, and there's a good amount of time involved. Some people think because you're on a nonprofit board, there's not a lot of time commitment, but there is. So you have to be aware there's a big time commitment in both.
And one interesting thing about the nonprofit that I serve on is a little bit unique, Goodwill Orange County. Most people know Goodwill because of the donation centers and the retail outlets, right? Mm-hmm. And it's unique in that its retail outlets is its mission. The people working there are serving the mission. And so it's actually run and operated like a retail, like you're working for, any kind of a large department store or big box chain. There's operational issues, there's execution issues. And so it's provided for me an opportunity to learn a sector that I personally didn't have familiarity with, which was retail, but the organization is held to the same level of being able to be self-supporting and not necessarily rely on the fundraising aspect. So even within the nonprofit sector, there's nuances and differences about what your exposure and experiences could bring to you. So it's really an exciting opportunity to kind of round out your experience base.
Yeah, I would just add one thing. while a nonprofit board often really can feed your personal passion. It sometimes also comes with a bit more of the doer. I know a couple of the boards that I serve on, I spend more time actually doing, whereas with a private company board, I think there's less doing and more oversight.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it depends, I guess, on the nonprofit, but typically there's more meetings, there's committees they want you to join, so it is time consuming. It is something that you have to love. Which bleeds nicely into the next question, which is, how do people determine what's really the right fit for them? You might like a mission, or you might veer towards a certain nonprofit, but how do you really know if it's the right fit for you, nonprofit or private?
Right. And I can start there because most of the nonprofits that I've served on the board, I first started as a volunteer, just so that I get to work with people in the organization, truly understand the mission, what the activities they conduct are. And then leading into board service, just being able to ask more questions, because some boards, definitely want directors that can help with the fundraising. Others, if the board's large enough, they may have you put your skills to work. So if you're not necessarily wanting to do fundraising, there are other elements of the board and the organization that you can spend time with. So I think it's key to spend time with the organization, make sure you ask the right questions. And as I said earlier, truly have a passion for the mission of the organization, because that's where you're going to get the most value, because it does take your own personal time. And so I've always felt rewarded with the nonprofits that I've been involved with.
And I think for me, whether it's private or nonprofit, whether it's a good fit comes down to two really important things for me personally. One is, do I really feel I can provide value to this board? Because, you don't want to be the board member who's not providing value. You need to understand what your proposition is and how your skills and strengths and weaknesses relate to the other board members. And are you actually providing value to something that board needs and wants? That's really important for me personally. And then two is the people and the fit. Do you like the people? Do you respect the people? Are your cultural values aligned? That's incredibly important. So for me, those are the two most important criteria. There's a lot of other factors that go into it, but those two probably get 80 to 90% of the weighting in determining if it's a good fit for me.
I think that's right, Joanne. I would just add, as you think about the right board for you, I think you have to be interested, right? If it's a nonprofit, maybe even passionate, but at least interested, right, in the company. And I think you have to think about, too, what you can bring to the board, kind of what you were saying, Joanne, like, what is your experience? What's your expertise? And is the culture of this company and of this board the right culture for me? Will I fit in? Will I be able to add value? And so I think that's the most important thing as you're thinking about what's the right board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you really have to like the individuals you're working with, right? It's like your job. It's like your career. You choose the right path for yourself, and you find people that as a cultural fit, as well as, is this the right fit for me in terms of my expertise? And to your point, Joanne, can you add value? And I think that's really key. And I loved what you said, Janet, about volunteering, because then you get to know the organization. And I think that's also a good point, because you don't really know the ins and outs if you're just put on the board. But if you do take the time to spend time with the organization and see how they function, it becomes a lot easier to then add that value, or to figure out where you can play a role that's significant. So those are great answers. I want to go into the next question, because I think this comes up a lot. So what are some of the common misconceptions about serving on a nonprofit or private company board?
I think there are two that are very common. One, that it requires less effort and time. Everybody has said it does require effort, and I will say even sometimes more than others, okay? And I think the other one is that you are not liable. I think you are, because your reputation is on the line and your name is on the line. So even if you're not on a public company board, I mean, you're liable. your reputation, your name, what the company does, who sits on that board are very important consideration. I think the two most common misconceptions are those two, no? Less effort and non-liable. And I think there is a lot of effort and you are liable. That's what I will put on the table.
Yeah,
I
agree with.
agree. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say I agree with Nicole, and I think back, for public companies, there's the fundamental fiduciary duties of duty of care and duty of loyalty, and those apply to nonprofit and private boards as well. So I think what Nicole said is appropriate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the other thing that would be a great consideration, and one of the things that I think there's this misconception that by a lot of women that getting on your first board is the most important thing, and it's not. Um, to me, it's about also understanding the cultural fit, which was kind of discussed before, but understanding those people and how do those boards make decisions and all of those other aspects. A lot of times, if you know the person, right, it comes from networking, and that's how you find out about the board opportunity, whether it's a private board or a nonprofit board. But ask some questions, right? Reach out to some of the people who are board members if you know them, or someone who knows them, and ask for an introduction just to understand what things are like inside the organization and inside the boardroom, so that you get an idea of how does that board make decisions? Is it a congenial environment? Is it not? Right. And I think that's really important, in particular, if you're the first female in the room.
It's very true. We talk about networking a lot at 50/50 Women on Boards, and building your network is so important for being able to secure your first, second, or third board seat, whether that's nonprofit, private, or public. And Joy, you kind of bled into that in terms of making sure that you find out, how a board operates and how it works, but making those connections. So when you're looking for your first nonprofit or private company board, are there any other suggestions you can share in terms of how to continue building that network, or how to get involved with an organization? Maybe it is volunteering. Maybe it is looking for somebody who you have a connection with that can introduce you to somebody. But I would love to hear from all of you in terms of what do you think that takes? And is there a difference between finding a nonprofit or private company board versus public?
I think there's a big difference. I mean, and Vonda, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think there's a big difference because nonprofit boards are always looking for people to assist, right? So there's always an opportunity. If someone wants to serve on a nonprofit board, they can find an opportunity. That's not difficult. Finding the right opportunity might be more difficult. But private company boards, that's a little bit different scenario, because a lot of private company boards are very, they keep everything close to the vest. It's much more difficult to penetrate that. And a lot of that is based solely on networking, on getting to know the right person and having someone who understands your skill set to make that recommendation.
Yeah, I'll echo what you said, Joy. You took some of the words right out of my mouth. But I would also say that networking can also help you get on the right nonprofit board. And I know several women who have gotten their first private company board because of the work they did on a nonprofit, because people were able to see them in action, and they saw what they could contribute to that board. The other thing I'll say about networking, though, somebody said this to me not too long ago when I mentioned that I was starting my first private company board search. They said, you need to let everybody that you know who would have any connections to boards that you're interested, without seeming desperate. And so it really broadened my scope of thinking about who have I worked with in the past that I know is connected to different boards. That's not really somebody that I currently talk with all the time. And have been so pleased at how many people have been receptive to saying, gosh, it's great to hear from you. Yes, I'd love to help you. So I think networking is really important.
And I want to just add to that, because when people ask me that question, I just find that networking is such a key. I look back all my public company boards, most of my nonprofit, my private company board, all came through people I knew in my networks. And I think that's another reason when you're looking at a nonprofit that you want to spend time with, because there are so many, is also to think about the people. I know when I relocated to Texas a few years ago, when I wanted to join a nonprofit, I looked at people in the community, got introductions, and they helped me get on a fairly prestigious nonprofit board, which had a lot of executive level, C-level people. And that was really just helpful to me. Several years back when I got on a nonprofit board, Second Harvest Food Bank of Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, so many, again, key executives and some that I still keep in touch with. They're in my network today. And, they're global heads of very big companies. And so, it's just helpful for them, for me to know them and see what they're doing, that they continue to do nonprofit work as well as still do a lot of great things in the for-profit world, including serving on, all three types of boards I look at: for-profit, nonprofit, and private.
If I may add something, I think I totally agree with Joy on the fact that for nonprofit, you actually need to say no because you receive too many requests and you need to make sure they're correct. And that for private, it's a lot about networking and contacts. I will only add that also letting know headhunters that you're interested in private boards may also be important, because we're seeing more and more that not only public companies are looking for headhunters' help to build boards, but also private companies. So that's the only item I would like to add, that you also need to let know headhunters that you're interested. No.
And I'll add a little color around that, because I do believe networking is very important. But in the private company world, there's a very large spectrum of readiness and maturity. There's private companies that are completely immature and not ready to have a board, still very founder-led, founder-driven. And then there's, the gigantic Cargills of the world, right? That are multi-billions of dollars, largest privately held company in the world. There's a wide spectrum. I have found in my experience that the companies that are truly ready and have healthy functioning boards, and they're looking to add specific skill sets, and they understand what the compensation structure is, are typically working with some kind of a recruiter or a family planning consultant. There's somebody coaching them and guiding them through that process. And I do believe that is a litmus, early indicator of their readiness and maturity to really embrace an independent board. And so I completely agree with Nicole. Headhunters, family consulting groups, there's a wide range of people out there, companies types that specialize in working with private companies, that really are a valuable asset to anyone looking to get on a private company board.
One piece of advice that I got when I was preparing my board bio was, when search firms call you, even though, I'm very happy at Google, when search firms call, share with them that you'd like to be connected to their board practice, because that's how I got my my recent private board. I think, making sure you're also in touch with other board directors, women in your network who have gone on the journey, and they can give you advice on your bio or advice overall, or be a reference for you. And then 50 Women to Watch, when you join this program, they give you a mentor. So my mentor is Sandra Beachlin. I know Janet's a mentor for others. Yeah. This was such a great experience for me. I adore Sandra. She gave me such great advice and connected me with a lot of folks in her network. So those are a few tips for you.
That's great.
Yeah, to Joanne's point, that one other thing I'll add is the other thing that you'll see in a lot of those for-profit entities, they also a lot of times will add advisory boards, or they'll have a board member who is an observer, but those are compensated positions, And so I think, except for in early stage companies, early stage startups, but I'm going to kind of exclude that and say these are more mature companies, but they're looking for people who have particular expertise to bring that value. And oftentimes those are a stepping stone to a fiduciary board. And so don't just poo-poo those, right? Have those conversations and see if it's something that's a right fit for you.
Yeah. And Joy, I might just add that, because I've had some friends in my network that have taken some advisory board positions recently. And, in that process, in interviewing and going on those advisory boards, they've been very upfront to ask, what's my potential for, becoming on the, I don't call it the real board, but the more formal board. And I think if you lay that out in your communication, that will be helpful, and it can be a stepping stone from advisory board to, a more for-profit role on the board.
Yeah, those are great points. Somebody brought up experiences and skill sets, and I think that's also something that people ask about a lot in terms of nonprofit board service. Yes, there's a lot of nonprofits out there, and yes, you can find a nonprofit that aligns with a mission that you're passionate about. But how do you find out what experiences that board needs, and how do you determine that that's really something that you can offer and that you can add value to? Because oftentimes it's not necessarily put out that they're looking for a board member with XYZ experience. So how do you determine what value you can add to the board, or find out those answers to your questions, basically?
I often ask if they have a board matrix.
Hmm.
And if they have, determined what the gaps are, if they're looking for specific skills for a new director. And, depending on how you ask the question, right? I'll ask like, hey, if it's something that makes sense for me, then obviously I'll put my name in, right? But we may also know other people who fit that bill that we can recommend another person. So I say, if you can let me know what you're looking for. I network with a lot of people looking for board roles. And if I can make a recommendation, I'm happy to refer them to you. And usually they're much more forthcoming then with that information than if it's just a cold ask.
Yeah. And maybe to add to Joy's point, depending on the nonprofit and the size of their board, some nonprofits I've just termed out of the Computer History Museum board, and it's 30 plus board directors because a lot of work gets done at the committee level. And so they have specific skill sets. So I'm known for my financial expertise, and so I served on the audit committee for the museum. But typically, organizations may know, so it may be a point to ask. Especially if they have a nominating governance committee. If they don't, then I think it's maybe even more prudent that you spend time and understand the organization, so you could see where your fit may be.
Yeah, that goes back to that volunteering piece too, which I think is great. Well, let's talk about compensation for a minute, because we also get this question. I often get called and say, they're asking me to, for a give get, and depending on the size of the nonprofit, it's anywhere from 5, 10 to sometimes even 20. And they want to know if it's a real request. So between nonprofit and private company boards, I know that we know this information, but for the audience, maybe if one of you wants to share, typically what that looks like.
I've definitely been asked to be the check writer. I honestly, I appreciate it when they're very upfront about it, to be fair, right? But if they're not, and you believe that may be part of it, or you've heard through the grapevine, or in some cases it's published on their website, right? That's what they're looking for. I think it's okay to ask, right? Like, okay, describe the role for me. What are the responsibilities and what's the accountability? Right? Are you looking for someone to fund? And if you ask the question about how they handle fundraising, that's when it will come out. If it's a nonprofit. But I've been asked for $30,000 for one board, and I cared very much about the board, but I'm kind of like, you're asking me to do a lot of work and you're asking me for $30,000. And that's okay. I don't fault them for that. But you have to make a decision if you care that much. This is my litmus test. Would you write that $30,000 check if there weren't a board seat involved?
I
I'm
agree
gonna
with
bring a different perspective on this. Maybe I normally do not join nonprofit boards that ask you for money. I think just giving them my time and my effort and my commitment and whatever I can bring to that board is enough value. and I'm very upfront about it. Okay, I'm not interested in being part of the fundraising. I'm interested in collaborating with the mission and what we're trying to achieve, and I normally very upfront. I think everybody can decide what they want, no? And if you have a lot of extra and you want to help the causes, normally you do. But normally I help causes in which I am not in the board on purpose. Okay, I'm either on the board or I'm either helping financially the organization. No, so I think it's a distinction to be made there that it's very personal to everyone. The other thing that I find very common and that you also need to take a decision if you're willing or not to do for nonprofits particularly is a lot of time what they want is your contacts, your contact list. You're opening the doors for meetings with whomever, the general manager, the CEO, and that's also something we each one of us have that has a lot of value. Who do we know, and what doors can we open to different organizations? And I think it's also when you're taking the decision to join a nonprofit board, is that the door opening you want to do or you don't want to do? And both situations are valid, but I just think, as Joy was saying, that you need to be very upfront about it. So I think that's something that is delicate to see on the non-for-profit boards, no, in terms of fundraising. And in terms of private boards, I think if they don't compensate you, you shouldn't be there because it's not going to get serious governance. But that's a very personal and strong opinion about it. So I do not join a private board that doesn't pay me. I just do that for nonprofit.
Heather, I have a quick point to add. With respect to the nonprofit, when I had full-time roles at my companies, the companies typically would help support the nonprofits I served on their boards with a contribution or a sponsorship, just because, I was spending my time and, I was within the management or leadership of the company. So I think that's something that we shouldn't forget, that if we have a full-time role, that perhaps the companies that we work for will help us in, supporting that give or get part of serving on the nonprofit board. And then to just quickly add to Nicole's point on the private boards, I served on one recently, and the compensation was equity, and as well as the travel expenses to go to the board meetings, because they were going to be on a path to go public. So I think that's something to consider with the private board as well.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. In terms of equity, is there anything else you want to add about that? Because I think there's questions around that too that come up in terms of what does that look like? And obviously it's different for every private company board, but and not that you have to state an amount, but what should you look for when they do offer you equity?
Yeah, I think it's, what the terms are. Sometimes just accepting to sit on the board, you'll start with some equity shares. Others, it's like earned over a period, and some may be that you get the opportunity to buy into the shares at a lower price, like the valuation. So I think those are all kinds of questions to look for and understand, so that am I going to have to pay something to get my shares, or am I getting the shares purely as a reward for compensation?
I think the
And
other
I
thing,
add taxes, no? Because sometimes when you get equity, the taxes implications can be very, very serious.
so yes, I would agree with both of those statements. I think it's really important. I get offered this all the time, and I could wallpaper my house in invaluable stock options. So, let's just, because I'm an investor as well, so I can just tell you that 80% of startups fail. So let's just go with that rule to begin with. But I think a more mature company, to Janet's point, that's on its way to IPO, that's a little bit different consideration. So understanding where that company is in its process and the terms of either the outright shares or the options that you're going to receive, how and when can they be exercised? There's terms that come along with those and conditions. I had a public company that I served on the board of, and we created an advisory board. We issued shares to our advisory board members as compensation, which were granted outright after every advisory board meeting. But being a public company, right, there's windows for exercise because they're privy to insider information. So you just have to understand what the terms are and what you're getting. And you have to make a conscious decision as to whether or not you're willing to do that work in hopes that it will pay off in the future.
Great. That's all great. And then in terms of once you're on the board, let's say on a nonprofit or private company board, what can individuals expect? I think we've talked a little bit about it in terms of the nonprofit is more of a doing position versus a private company board or public company board. But if you can go into some details about what it takes to serve on a nonprofit versus private, I think that'd be great for everybody to hear.
Maybe just to start, because I have joined nonprofit boards where there's actually a formal onboarding where you get a lot of information with respect to the nonprofit's activities, its roles, the various committees. And so I think that can be helpful. And if there isn't a formal onboarding process, you could certainly ask for that. One of my nonprofits had, as well as for-profits do this, is you have a buddy assigned to you, and that buddy, works with you, be it 6 months or during your first 12 months on the board, and is there to help answer questions, just to help make sure that you're really getting up to speed on the activities of the organization. So, I would suggest those, or at least asking those questions either before you join the board, or if you join the board, certainly soon, after you've started serving on it.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great point, Janet, because my experience on nonprofit boards has been the same. Very organized, good governance, good onboarding. I do believe if they have a mature board and they have good governance in place, you're not going to see a huge difference. I think they're both run professionally in accordance with standard governance protocol. And I have not, when you say what next, Heather, the what next has looked very similar to me, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit in my experience. And again, it's a litmus test of, are they a well-run organization, and do they take the governance of the board seriously? And the main job of the board is the CEO, right? To hire and fire the CEO. That's the number one responsibility, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. And how you get there can look very similar, again, if it's a mature and well-run organization.
Yeah, I would just add, I think all of those points are absolutely right. And I think that doing those upfront conversations around what are the expectations and the commitments are super important. And then when you get there, some other things will come up, right? So I think somebody mentioned that you'll be expected probably to join a committee, and that might entail some work. There are, particularly for nonprofit boards, there are generally fundraising events that you're going to be invited to. I know with the two boards that I sit on, there are so many invitations to things like that I have to be very diligent about which are the ones that are important to me and where can I provide the most value to the companies. And so there are always extra things that are a part of your role as a board member, and you have to kind of navigate and sort of figure out where you can bring the most value.
I would like to add another point that is maybe very Latin, so I'm not sure it applies so well to the US, but I will agree that when there is good governance, there is not a lot of difference. But when private boards are a little bit more immature, and in the case of Mexico, for example, a lot of times they're family business. So I think the ability to being able to moderate, to conciliate, and to make sure that everybody doesn't kill each other, it's a very important ability that you need to develop as a board member on private company boards that are a little bit more immature or just starting on the governance route. And I think that is a skill that you need to be sure that you can bring to the table. So I think getting to know very well who is on that board is important.
Nicole, it's not a Latin thing. It's a family business thing.
I
No,
know,
it's true with, no,
I
it's
didn't want
very
to
true with
offend
family.
anyone, but I
Yeah,
see it a
no,
lot.
we
And it's
see that
normal.
with family businesses that are huge here. I mean, it could be a $500 million company, and you see that because families are families, right? And at the end of the day, there's always kind of, even though they support each other, there's a little push-pull that exists, and those dynamics continue in the boardroom.
Yeah. Even if it's not family and it's a private company, sometimes they've brought on individuals who they know really well, right? And then if you come in as an independent board director, you have to navigate that. But I love what Janet said too about having someone to help guide you, because I think that's so important, because once you're thrown into the board, you immediately join the first meeting and people are having discussions about things that you don't really have a lot of background on or context to put towards it unless you've really spent time with the organization. So I think having someone there to support you is important, so you can provide value and you can start to give input on things that matter and where you need to add your particular expertise. So I love that idea, because I think for nonprofit boards, sometimes the onboarding process isn't always clear. So to have someone help you along the way, I think is important. And it also helps you network with that individual, find out who they are, where else are they serving on boards, and that's key. If that's going to be your first route or your first entry to board service, that's a great way to continue to grow your network and build those relationships, so that when you are looking for a private or public company board, you have additional people you can tap into who have seen you in action and see your work and then can vouch for you. Right? Well, we only have about 3 minutes left. So before we have to end the program, I just wanted to get your final thoughts on nonprofit and private company board service and any advice you'd like to give the audience, whether that's a personal, experience you've had, et cetera. We can just share that really quickly, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Great. I can start, Heather, if you like.
Yeah.
I think, as I've said through my remarks, there are so many nonprofit boards, and I find personally a lot of satisfaction from serving on those boards. But it takes passion for the mission. So just make sure that you do your investigation or your homework and are really excited, about that board opportunity. And if you see a board that you like, look at your network and, perhaps ask someone to help you get an introduction to that board if you don't already have one. But I find that of tremendous value, and it's been helpful for me in my network. As Heather said, when you're doing work, people notice you. And, I've had for a long time a former, she's now retired, COO of a public company that would just stand up and champion all the volunteer work I did for this nonprofit that we both served on. So thank you again for allowing me to be here today.
Yeah, no, thanks for being here.
I would add that I think for me, one of the things I've noticed recently is my background in cybersecurity and AI and some things like that. I get approached and I have to ask some questions around, are you looking basically for a consultant, or are you looking for a board member? Because there's a big difference between doing oversight and participating. Obviously, there's more participation in the nonprofit space. And if I can clearly understand what the goal is, then it's great. I've kind of limited the number of nonprofit boards I'm willing to serve on based on time commitment going forward. But I think just understanding exactly what they're looking for in this board role, and is that something, not only can you do it, but are you willing to do it?
Mm-hmm.
I think a few thoughts here. Know your soundbite, know your value proposition. For me, I'm a digital director with AI, ML, analytics, cloud security. That's what I would bring to a board. Position yourself as a thought partner to the CEO. Remember, we're operators now, but in a board role, you're going to be asking a lot more questions. Be a mentor to the senior leadership if they want you to be. Be prepared. I've heard that it takes about 8 hours of prep to go to a private or public board meeting, less so on the nonprofit side, but you have to be prepared. Be a deep listener and a collaborator. One of the questions I got asked on this board interview was, what do you like to do for fun? Kind of struck me as, wow, they want to know me. and they really want to know who you are so you can become really close and get personal with the other board members. And when you pose a question, do it in a constructive way.
That's great. Wonderful.
Then maybe me. I think what I will say is I think it's a great experience to participate in nonprofit and private boards. So I will kind of invite everybody to do it because you learn a lot, you bring value, and it's fun, and you get to meet great people. I will also say nothing is forever. And if you, for whatever reason, sit in a board that you believe is not a good fit or you have been serving for too long, there is also a valid point on saying, I have already been in this board for 10 years, time to do something new. And I think sometimes we believe these commitments are for life. And I don't think they need to be for life. I think boards need to be renewed constantly. And I think it's a value thing to say how long I want to stay in X board or Y board. So I will just add that.
Wonderful.
And I'll just end by maybe saying, in addition to exploring the different boards out there, prepare yourself to make sure you understand board governance. And 50/50 does a great job of preparing women. So thank you for that. And Patty, I like what you said about know your sound bites, because it's so important to be able to very succinctly say what you can bring to the table for board service.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for sharing your expertise and for being with us today. We've enjoyed the conversation so much, and so has the audience. And I'll just leave you with applications are open for 50 Women to Watch for boards until April 30th. So please apply. And if you're looking for educational board readiness workshops to help continue your path to the boardroom, you can check out our website at 5050wob.com. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for the invitation.
Bye-bye.
Bye.